In these last set of notes, we're going to talk about how we can use our theorems to solve the problems, and it's going to be a mixture of all of our special segments. So in this first one, we see that we need to solve for x, and they give us what BD and AE equals. And that is assuming that B is the midpoint of AC, so we have two congruent segments, and it says that D is the midpoint of CE, so we have two separate congruent segments. So that tells us that this segment right here is the mid segment. We need to find the value of x, plus then take that and plug it back in to find our mid segment and the side it's parallel to. So we know that the mid segment is going to be, if we double that, that will give us our side it's parallel to. Or if we have the third side, we can divide that by 2 and make that equal to our mid segment. But I find it easier to multiply the mid segment by 2. When we set it up, this is what we've got. So we have 2 times the mid segment is equal to our third side, or that parallel side, so that we need to distribute. That would give us 4x plus 10. If we subtract our x's over to the right, that gives us a 2x. If I move my 4 to the left, that would be a positive 14. And then when I solve for x, we would get x equals 7. So that's part of it. Now we need to take it and put it back into each of those segments. So we have 2 times 7 plus our 5, plus we're going to have our 6 times the 7 minus the 4. For BD, we have 14 plus 5, so that would be 19. For the segment AE, we have 42 minus 8, and that would give us a 42 minus 4 gives you a 38. On to number 2, we have that the angle of CBD is 8x plus 2. Then we have the angle of CAE is 6x plus 10. Now we know then again that B is the midpoint of that side, and we have that D is also the midpoint, so we know this is the mid segment. To know some things about the angles is if we have a mid segment, that means it's parallel to the third side in the triangle. If my 2 lines are parallel right here, then that means this is the transversal and we have corresponding angles, and the corresponding angles will be congruent to each other. Because they're congruent, we need to set them equal to each other. So we've got 8x plus 2 equals 6x plus 10. If we subtract the 6x over, we have a 2x on the left. If we subtract our 2 to the right, that would give us an 8 on the other side, so x will equal a 4. Now we need to find the value of our angle CBD. And since CBD is 8x plus 2, we have 8 times 4 plus 2. So we have 32 plus 2. That would give us a 34 degrees. Number 3 is now talking about our ray. So our segment CD is bisecting angle FCG. So that means this is an angle bisector. Because it's an angle bisector, we can see in our picture that those angles are going to be congruent to each other. But also, if we have an angle bisector and we connect it to the edge of the angle and it's perpendicular to that edge, then those segments are also congruent to each other. Since they gave us the length of each of those segments, we can set them equal to each other to solve for x. This is what our equation should look like. If we set them equal to each other, we can subtract the 3x to the left, so we'd have a 2x. We can add our 6 to the other side, and that would give us a 22. Divide by 2, and we get x equals 11. But this one is asking really for the length of DG, so we need to take our x and put it back into that equation. To simplify it, then we've got 3 times 11, so that's 33 plus our 16, so we have a 49 is the length of DG. In number 4, we see we have an angle bisector again, and I drew some things in there. It tells us angle 1 is 2x plus 15. It also tells us that angle ACB, so that's this whole angle altogether, is 7x minus 15. If we know it bisects, if CP bisects it, that means we have angle bisector again. Our 2 individual angles will be equal to each other, so angle 1 and angle 2 are equal. But if we know what the total is, that means that we can double one of the angles. So I can double the measure of angle 1, and that should equal the whole angle altogether. When I double the 2x plus 15, so my measure of angle 1, that will equal my purple angle, the 7x minus 15. And now we can solve for x. So we have a 4x plus 30 once you distribute. Then we can move our 4 to the other side with our x's. We get a 3x. we can add the 15 over and we get 45. If we divide our x's by 3, then we end up with 15. Since we want what the measure of angle 2 is, and we know that's the same as angle 1, we can take the 15 and put it into the equation for measure of angle 1. So that would be 2 times 15, which is 30, plus another 15, and we get a 45. Number 5 is a pretty common question for an altitude question. So we know that YB is the altitude, and with the altitude, we know it connects the vertex to 90 degrees on the opposite side. That means in our picture, we can draw a right angle because we know it's going to be 90 degrees where it touches the opposite side of our triangle. And that's the part that we need. Because if YBZ, so YBZ, that's this angle right here where I've got my marking, if that is equal to that 8x minus 30, but we already know that it equals 90 degrees, we can set that equal to 90 degrees. And this is what it would look like. So we set the angle that we are given equal to 90 degrees because we know that is where it's perpendicular to that third or the other side in the triangle. I want you now to go through and solve for x. When you solve for x, you should end up with x equals 15 because you can add your 30 over to the other side, so you get 120 equals your 8x, and when you take 120 divided by 8, you get 15. In the next triangle for number 6, SE and FR are medians. So some things we know about medians is it goes through the vertex and its midpoint. Since R has to be the midpoint, we have 2 congruent segments, and since S has to be in the midpoint, we have 2 congruent segments as well. And now they're going to give us some different measurements. They give us SQ and SE, the whole length. Previously, in one of the videos, I had described that our median is really divided up into 3 equal pieces. So we have one whole piece, this is another one, and then there's my third piece. This side is 2 out of the 3, and this piece is only one of them. So if we are given the SQ as 2x plus 3, and we are given that SE, so the whole length of it, is 8x minus 5, we can see that 2x plus 3, all those are congruent to each other, so we can multiply by 3, since there's 3 of them that make up the whole segment. And again, the reason why is because we know the median, we can divide it up into 3 equal pieces. This point Q, our centroid, will be only 1/3, so it's going to be closer to the edge than it is to the vertex angle. So our vertex angle, that piece is the longer of them, so that takes up 2 of them, and this distance from the edge of the circle to the centroid is only 1 of them. So we can see it's 3 equal pieces. We have the length of 1, so we can multiply by 3, and that would equal the whole length. Now for solving, we can distribute, so don't forget to distribute the 3 as well. Then we have a 6x and an 8x. Let's move the 6x over to join the 8, so we subtract it. Then we have a negative 5 or a minus 5. We have to add it over with the 9, so we get 14. And then we'll get x equals 7 for our x. In this last one, we have now a perpendicular bisector, and we know that goes through the midpoint, and it is 90 degrees to that side. Another name for it with this very specific picture is it does go through the vertex. So if it goes through the vertex and the median, or vertex and the midpoint, sorry, it is the median. If it goes through the vertex and it's 90 degrees, then that's also the altitude. So really there's other names for this line, mostly just because it goes through the vertex and it is perpendicular and the midpoint. So going on, we know that O is the midpoint then, so if we are given the 2 different segments, we know that those are congruent to each other. And I want you now to solve for the value of x, and then you have to plug it back in to find the value of LO. You should have set them equal to each other to solve for x. When you solve for x, you should have gotten x equals 11. Then it asks for the length of LO, which means you need to multiply it back out. So we get 132 minus the 30, and you get 102 then for the length of LO.